everybody. This is Matt Russell with the USDA Farm to School Grant Program. I just want to welcome everybody to today's call where we'll be discussing the FY2017 Farm to School Grant Program request for application, so funding available through the USDA's Farm to School Grant Program. Again, thank you for joining today's call. I also want to introduce my colleague Anna Arrowsmith, who will be joining us today and helping us talk about some of the application processes. So welcome, Anna. So quick overview of the agenda. I'm going to give some background information on the grant program. We're going to go over the application process and really get into the nuts and bolts of the process, looking at the scoring, the budget and match, the registration processes, and the resources that are available to you as an application or as an applicant or an interested applicant. So jumping into the background of the grant program, the authority and the purpose of the program. The Farm to School Grant Program was authorized in the 2010 Healthy, Hungry, Free Kids Act. And so with that, we now have $5 million to award in grants and technical assistance. The purpose is to improve access to local foods in eligible schools through grants and technical assistance. And the program is managed by the USDA Food and Nutrition Service. We work with a lot of other agencies in USDA, but the program itself is managed by FNS. So what are the competitive grants for? Broad picture, broad stroke, the grant program is intended to provide funding for training, supporting operations, planning farm-to-school initiatives, purchasing equipment and supplies, developing partnerships, and implementing farm-to-school programs. Again, those are pretty broad categories, and we're going to dive deeper into that over the next 50 minutes. So the USDA context. So within the USDA, the Farm-to-School program, the USDA views the Farm-to-School program, they operate best when they're an integrated approach where the cafeteria changes, where changes that are in the cafeteria are supported and reinforced throughout the school learning environment. So activities that are happening in the cafeteria, let's say bringing in local strawberries for taste tests, are supported by activities that are in the classroom. So it might be working in biology class about strawberry plants, or working out in the garden and doing integrated curriculum approaches. It's also inclusive. It relates to procurement. It relates to the procurement of a wide variety of foods. So we're talking about fruits and vegetables. We're talking about value-added products. We're talking about buying products from farmers, ranchers, fishermen. It's really in the context of the location of the application, so because folks have different access to different agricultural products in their area. The ultimate vision for Farm to School is that students have regular access to local healthy food. And it is about creating a healthy food environment. It's about bringing healthy local food into the schools. So when we define local, again, we were talking about it's very inclusive. It's not just fruits and vegetables, though in many areas that's where communities get started, but we're talking about dairy, meat, poultry, beans and grains, center of the plate items, eggs, vegetables. So when you're thinking about Farm to School and you're thinking about your application, think broadly. Think about the resources that are available in your communities. So general eligibility requirements. Who is eligible for the Farm to School Grant Program? This is outlined in the authorizing legislation. Who can apply? Eligible schools and school districts, state and local agencies, Indian tribal organizations, agricultural producers or groups of agricultural producers, and nonprofit entities. What kind of projects? Funding is intended for those projects that will ultimately benefit children in grades pre-K through 12, served through the National School Lunch Program, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, Summer Food Service, and Seamless Summer. So it's the federal food service programs, and again, the ultimate, the end target population is pre-K through 12 students. Who can apply? So funding is available to support school-based programs only. At this time, that really applies to a lot of the pre-K and the summer applications. There are opportunities for those programs to be hosted by non-school sites, whether it be a community center or a park district. But in the case of this grant program, we are looking at school-based programs only. And again, they are pre-K through 12 schools that participate in the federal feeding program, such as the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program. It is important to note that pre-K, that nonprofit schools are also available. Eligible nonprofit, charter schools, Indian tribal schools, as long as they participate in the National School Lunch or Breakfast Program and operate one of the other federal feeding programs. Not eligible as a lead entity. This is a question we get a lot. So, in accordance with the authorizing legislation, entities that are not eligible to be a lead, but they are eligible to be a partner, are institutions of higher learning, so colleges and universities, cooperative extension services. We get a lot of questions about it. Well, my cooperative extension is a 501c3 or my university is a 501c3. Under federal definitions, there is some nuance there, so it is still not the case that your university or extension is it is still not eligible for the grant program to be a lead entity submitting an application. Also, individual parents, teachers, students, and hospitals are ineligible to apply. These groups are encouraged, it is allowed and are encouraged to be partners, and we'll talk more about that throughout the afternoon. So a few updates in FY2017. We have a lot of folks that have applied for the grant program or sat in on past webinars. So we want to talk a little bit about what changes this year from last year. The last year, training grants were submitted via email, at least letters of intent, and then they went through the grants.gov process. Training grants this year are submitted online using grants.gov. We'll talk more about that. We've added some information in the RFA, the request for application, about the funding priorities, which we'll discuss. And applicants must choose between submitting one type of application. In years past, folks were able to apply for a training grant and another type. This year, you have to pick, everyone has to pick one type. You can apply for a training grant or a support service or an implementation or a planning. We'll talk more about those grants in a minute, but it's important to note that you can only apply for one. Additional funding is not available for volunteer service projects. Last year, there was an additional $1 million that was distributed through the grant program to support these particular programs, and that is not the case. The program, again, this year is limited to $5 million. We are getting some questions about the definitions of each types of grant, and we're going to go through that. We're going to go through each type of grant and walk through what types of activities can be supported and such. So FY2017 priorities. This is important. We want to lead with this so that you can think about your application in the context of the priorities for the grant programs. So funding priorities. This doesn't mean these are the only things we're funding, but they are things that are receiving priority this year. So applications from state agencies are a funding priority this year. So if you have a partner that is a state agency or an agency that you work with that is interested in the program, it's important to get the word out on the state agencies. Projects that aim to bring local and regional foods into school-based child and adult care food programs is important, and the seamless summer, so summer feeding programs. This year, as in years past, there is a funding priority for projects that include innovative procurement strategies and project submissions that reach more than one school. And that is a way for us to leverage the program funds. So the types of grants available this year, we have support service grants, implementation grants, planning, and training. You can see here that approximate distribution of awards, support service will represent approximately 50%, implementation 25%, 15% for planning, and 10% for training. It's important to note that it's a USDA priority to ensure geographic diversity, so we do the best we can with the applications that we receive to ensure that the projects are distributed throughout the country both in throughout the country, in states throughout the country, but also in rural and urban settings. Again, you can apply for just one grant. It's important to note, so you have to choose between one of the 4 grant types. You may be listed as a partner or collaborator on multiple projects. So that's important to know that in your community, if you have other organizations or applicants that you would like to work with, you are allowed. You have to be if you want to apply, you can only apply for one, but you can be a partner on multiple applications. So diving right into support service grants. The funding range for support service grants is $65,000 to $100,000. The projects can range from 1 to 2 years, and that's really up to you as an applicant. Does it make sense for your project to be 12 months, 16, 18, or anywhere in between the 12 and 24-month range? Sometimes it aligns with school years. Sometimes it aligns with people's fiscal years. So it really is what works for you. It's important to note that only 10% of the budget can go towards food costs, and that is for educational uses of food, not to supplement your budget for your school meal programs. So in the case you want to do a taste testing or you're doing some work in the gardens, so for educational purpose, maybe developing new recipes. 25% match is required, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here later in the presentation. So the support service grants are intended to help entities that are working with schools or school districts to develop their farm to school initiatives. Who can apply? Who is eligible for a support service grant? State and local agencies, Indian tribal organizations, ag producers or groups of ag producers, and nonprofit entities. And it's important to note that we encourage applications from these groups that have strong partnerships in place that are working on farm to school. So what are allowable activities for support service grants? It's a wide range of activities here. I'm not going to go through this whole list, but it's important to note that there's a wide range of activities that range from bringing local products into school-based summer programs, working with doing taste tests and bringing in new products to understand the market feasibility, developing, improving infrastructure, accommodating new ingredients on new menus, conducting farm-to-school evaluations, strategic planning. So I encourage you, all this information is in the request for applications. So I encourage you to look at this list, but it is note that these are examples of activities. There are other activities that are supported through a support service grant. If you have an idea and you don't see it reflected in this list, I encourage you to reach out to us. We'll have our contact information at the end of the presentation, and check in with us to see if it's an allowable activity so you can move forward. There are a few questions coming across the line about the availability of the slides. I just want to remind everybody that we will make these slides available after the call, and we will also have the recording available for everyone after the call. So when you put together your application for a support service grant, this is what's going to be asked of you. It's going to be asked for your background information, information about the project, and quality assurance and staffing. So your organizational information, your experience with farm-to-school initiatives, lessons learned. We want to hear about what work you've done in this field, what have you learned, and how is that going to inform your project. And then you're going to be asked to describe your project. Who are your key partners? You're getting into the nuts and bolts of your objectives, your activities, your timelines, your evaluation plan. It's really important to follow the request for application that outlines all this information step by step. The request for application will take you through each question, and it's important to answer those questions in full. So as an applicant for a support service grant, here's what you must have. You have to have evidence of existing community support. You will be asked to load at least a minimum of 3 letters of support for partners that you're working with in your grant. You also have to have a 25% match for your total project cost. If you don't meet the minimum requirements of what you must have, you may be deemed ineligible for the grant program. So you are encouraged to have collaborations where the USD investment would be additive or readily leveraged, supply chain partners to show that you have an understanding and partnerships that help move product from production to the schools, evidence of farm-to-school program maturity and its success to date, showing that you have the experience. Again, we prefer projects that reach more than one school and that focus on procurement strategies, innovative procurement strategies. People sometimes ask, well, what is an innovative procurement strategy? It's relative to the community that's applying. So it's trying new procurement strategies within the context of your community. Maybe you haven't worked with your distributors to identify and bring in local food, and in that case, it would be an innovative strategy for you. Maybe your community wants to start reaching out directly to ranchers in your community through a competitive procurement process. That would be innovative in your case. Here we're going to talk a little bit about the requirements for a support service grant. If you receive a grant, this is what is expected of you. You will participate in orientation calls, webinars, regularly scheduled meetings, engage in periodic one-on-one consultation with USDA personnel. This third point is important. You will be required as a grantee to attend a face-to-face meeting with USDA personnel. It's an opportunity for us to bring everyone together to share examples, expertise, to do some training on procurement. So that's something that you'll note in your application, that you will be asked to include the travel costs. The USDA will pay for that through the grant. You will be required to complete the standardized evaluation activities, and you may be asked to host USDA personnel for a site visit. But if that is the case, that will be paid for by the USDA. All right, moving on to implementation grants. Implementation grants, funding range $65,000 to $100,000. Again, it's a 1 to 2 year span, and it has the same 10% food and 25% match requirements. Implementation grants are for schools and school districts that are already operating at some level of farm-to-school program, and the grant funds will be used to help them scale up and further develop their farm-to-school initiatives. So who can apply for an implementation grant? It's pre-K through 12 school food authorities, nonprofit private schools, charter schools, Indian tribal schools, and others in the national school or breakfast program. An example there would be a group home facility for adolescents that operate the National School Lunch Program. They operate the school lunch program. They are serving students that are range in age from pre-K to 12. They would be eligible for the program as well. There are other examples. If you have a question about eligibility, please, I encourage you to reach out. Do you have to participate in the National School Lunch or Breakfast Program? The answer to that is yes. And the question that we get most often is, we're in the process of applying. At the time of application, you need to be participating in those programs. Multi-district submissions. We encourage multi-district submissions, and that is the case. What that looks like in an application would be school district 1 is partnering with 2 to 3, let's say, other school districts in their area. One school district would be the lead, but they're planning to do a multi-district comprehensive program. That is a way to help USDA leverage their funds. It's also a way for communities to leverage the expertise, perhaps the buying power of multiple counties or school districts. So we do encourage multi-district submissions. Allowable activities. Again, you'll see a theme here. There's a wide variety of activities that are allowable in the grant program. So I encourage you to look at this list and to think creatively about what you want your farm-to-school program to look like. In the ideal scenario, see if those activities line up, and if they don't, reach out to us. It may very well be an allowable activity. So a few examples: bringing more value-added, minimally processed, regionally sourced components into the cafeteria. Doing strategic planning efforts to coordinate across multiple districts. Creating communications and outreach plans to promote the local food that you're bringing into your schools, to promote it to the students, to the teachers, to the parents, to the other community stakeholders. Establishing stronger community partnerships, so working with culinary schools, menu development. So the implementation application, what does it look like? Again, The majority of the application is the proposal narrative. It's going to ask you about your procurement and your promotion experience, your experience with experiential learning, curriculum integration. It's going to ask you to lay out your evaluation, your lessons learned. So what is the project? What do you propose to do with your project? The key project partners, objectives, activities, timelines, so laying out exactly how the funds will be used. Again, your evaluation plan, and then sustainability is an important part of the applications. How do you plan to extend this work after the grant ends? If this is intended to be a one-time grant for 12 to 24 months, how do you anticipate, how do you plan to keep the work going when the federally funded project is over? Again, the narrative proposals are all laid out in the request for application. So what you must have as an implementation grantee? Again, evidence of existing community support. In many ways, that's demonstrated through the required letters of support. So those will be uploaded into grants.gov with your application. Again, there's a 25% match. And without those letters of support, you may be deemed ineligible for the application. Similar to the support service grants, you're encouraged to submit projects where the USDA investment will be additive or readily leveraged. So, are there other project funds that, or other projects that are being funded that this is adding on to? It's supporting, it's expanding. Supply chain partnerships, demonstrating that you, that as a district, that you have started the conversations with suppliers, with distributors. Evidence of farm to school maturity or success to date. We have two different grants, and we'll talk about planning next, but implementation is for expanding existing projects. We have other funds for folks that are just getting started. So for the implementation, we want to see evidence of program maturity. Again, we would encourage submissions that are more than one school and that have innovative procurement. Similar to the support service grants, you will be required to participate in onboarding webinars, in the periodic one-on-one consultation, at least one farm-to-school meeting face-to-face with USDA personnel and your other grantees. The traveling costs will be covered by the grant. There will be standardized evaluation activities that you will participate as a grantee. And again, you may be asked to host USDA officials, but all the costs associated with the site visits will be covered by the department. So the third type of grant is the planning grant. There a question coming across the line about the amount of funding for that should be set aside for the site visits, the face-to-face meetings. In our request for application materials, support materials on our line, we have a frequently asked questions. It lays out all that information in the frequently asked questions. We'll talk about those resources here in a few minutes. Planning grants, they range from $20,000 to $45,000. They are 18-month projects, and again, only 10% of the budget can go towards food, and it has to be used for educational purposes. And again, as mandated by the authorizing legislation, there's a 25% match. Planning grants are for schools or school districts that are just getting started with their farm-to-school efforts. And it really is an opportunity for them to design a program from the ground up. It's an 18-month project that will take you through a strategic planning process. The end goal of the project is for you to have an action plan that says, here's what our project is going to look like in the next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. And the resources will be provided to you as a planning grantee over those 18 months to help you put together that action plan. It's for pre-K through 12 school food authorities, again, nonprofit, private schools, charter schools, Indian tribal schools, and others that participate in the National School Lunch or Breakfast program. It's important to note here that it's a common question that we get from applicants is, well, I don't know if I should be a planning grant, go after the planning grant or the implementation grant. We have additional guidance in the FAQ online, which will help you kind of think through that process. But it's also important to note that the planning grants are an opportunity to go through an 18-month strategic planning process with the goal of developing an action plan. So if that is what your school district would benefit from when you're just getting started, planning grant may be right for you. multi-district submissions similar to implementation grants. We encourage folks, if one school district wants to be the lead on a multi-district submission, that would be great. And then that school district could partner with other districts in the area to go through the strategic planning process. Allowable activities. First and foremost is the development of the Farm-to-School Action Plan. It includes specific goals, specific activities, timelines for implementing and who's going to be responsible for those activities. In addition to the Farm-to-School Action Plan, planning grantees can work to align their farm-to-school plan with existing goals, working to implement or to integrate farm-to-school concepts into their wellness policy. So there's not quite as a wide of range of activities for the planning grantees as there are for the other types, but there is a lot of support to take planning grantees through the strategic planning process over the 18 months. Planning applications. The proposal narrative, the school districts, so you'll be asked for the background on the school district and any farm-to-school background information or relevant farm-to-school, because in most cases, planning grantees have had minimal experience with farm-to-school, but and many of them have had very relevant experience, whether it's starting with some school gardens or doing some outreach through their FFA program. You'll be asked about the need and readiness of your school district, your objectives, activities, and timelines, evaluation, project management, staffing. There is a component of dissemination of findings. How are you going to share what you've learned over your process with the community that you are working with? That's an important part of sustainability, so we ask about that as well. Again, you must have 25% match. We ask that you include the CVs of all your staff or the key staff that are working on the project. We are, again, encourage that submissions that reach more than one school are preferred. Innovative procurement, so thinking critically about your procurement options. You are not required to submit letters of support because you are just getting started and you are just beginning to develop your network. But if you have partners that you would like to include in letters of support, then you are encouraged to do that as well. We are getting a few questions across the line asking about the planning grants. The eligibility for planning grants and implementation are the same, and that you do have to participate in the National School Lunch or Breakfast Program or have school-based summer or CACFP programming. Similar to the other grants, but one key note or difference to note is that required of the planning grantees is the completion or the development of a school action plan. You'll also be required to attend the grantee gathering, which will have a session dedicated to helping you put that action plan together. Costs will be covered by the USDA. You will be asked to complete standardized evaluation activities and may be asked to host a site visit. In those cases, the cost will be covered by the USDA. The final grant track are our training grants. The training grants have two different ranges. So if it's a state-focused project, it ranges from $15,000 to $25,000. If it's a regional or a national project in scope, it ranges from $25,000 to $50,000. In this case, as with the other grants, there is a 25% match. So, what are the training grants for? They are intended to support state, regional, and national trainings that have specific emphasis on developing supply chain relationships by connecting local producers to schools and school buyers. So, there could be a wide range of activities that fall in this category, from training on local procurement, food safety, school gardens, culinary education, and integration of our agricultural-based curriculum. So, it's training related to farm to school. And who can apply? Nonprofit organizations, state and local agencies, Indian tribal organizations, and agricultural producers. It's important to note that the three different types of project scopes are statewide, region, which is defined as more than one state, or national. So we can also fund projects that want to reach a national audience. So what are some of the activities or the types of the topics? Technical assistant trainings that address local procurement, trainings that bring together stakeholders across the supply chain, distributors, manufacturers, educators, to stimulate cross-learning and business connections, training on school garden development or food and agriculture curriculum, culinary training or educational activities, and network building and information sharing, so professional development for farm-to-school practitioners. Again, there must be a 25% match. You must include relevant CVs for the grant program, and if you don't do these things, you may be deemed ineligible. Applicants may include letters of support, and you may include relevant materials. So, if you had past experience hosting these events, you can submit, for example, the agenda from past or maybe media coverage from other events that you've had to demonstrate your experience. There are a few requirements that are unique to training grants. We do ask that you make your best faith effort to include our USDA regional staff in the planning process for your event. The USDA regional staff have a wealth of knowledge and strong network connections, and they can help in that process. When relevant, distributing USDA farm-to-school fact sheets, using the USDA logo on materials, using standardized evaluation, and then submitting those results. And then in the end, we would like to see all the agendas and presentations from those trainings because it allows us to glean best practices to share with practitioners. The Healthy Hungry Free Kids Act, the authorizing legislation, mandates that priority consideration be given to schools or districts serving a high proportion of children who are eligible for free or reduced price meals. Do you need a high percentage to apply is the first question we get from most folks, and the answer is no. But it is a priority consideration by the selecting official. It is a mandate from Congress who authorized this program. So the selecting official who makes the final selection will take into account the free and reduced price eligibility rates. But extra points are not assigned. So that's something to note. Also in the authorizing legislation, and I mentioned it earlier, is geographic diversity. It's important that states from across the country and both urban and rural applications are considered for funding. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Anna, and she's going to work through some of the registration forms and formats. I'm going to start working through some of the questions, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Anna.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Okay, excuse me, before you can submit your application, there are a few things that you're going to need to do ahead of time. So I'm going to go over the various online registrations that need to be completed, the required forms, and the format for the submission of your application. If you have not applied for a federal grant recently, there are a few registrations that you're going to need to complete ahead of time. The first is the Data Universal Numbering System, or the DUNS number. Your organization most likely already has this, so you'll need to get that number so that you'll be prepared for the next step in the registration, which is the next registration, which is the System for Award Management. Registration with System for Award Management, or SAM, is required so that we're able to check for any red flags from a fiscal perspective. So, for example, is your organization fiscally stable, and are you a high or low risk for award? Verification with SAM can take a few business days, so you want to give yourself plenty of time to get this completed. And then the next step is registering with grants.gov. And grants.gov is the online portal that you'll use to submit your application. All applications must be submitted through grants.gov, so you want to be sure that you have an active account well before it's time to submit your application in December. And really, even if you decide not to submit a farm-to-school grant application this cycle, it would be a good idea to register with sam.gov anyway, so you'll have that out of the way for any future opportunities that you do want to apply for. You can also register with grants.gov regardless of whether or not you decide to apply this cycle. but those accounts are deactivated after a year of inactivity. So something to consider. And again, grants.gov takes between 3 and 5 business days. So none of these things are things that you want to wait till the last second for. And then the forms that go along with your application, there are some that are required with your application submission. And the way that grants.gov works, you won't be able to submit your application without them. It'll reject it if you don't have all of the required forms that we list here. So let's go over that list now. The first are the budget forms, or what we call the SF424 family of forms. And these are the SF424, the 424A, the 424B, and then the SFLLL, which is a lobbying form. If you are a for or nonprofit corporation, you must also complete the AB 3030. And then if you're not sure whether or not that applies to you, there is guidance on the actual form, which can be found either in the forms section on grants.gov, or it's also included with the application package if you've already downloaded that. There's also a farm-to-school cover sheet that must be included with your application, and you want to be sure to complete all sections of that form so we can make sure your application is evaluated under the correct farm-to-school program. The required format for your application, you want to include obviously a table of contents, and then for your actual narrative, there is a 10-page maximum for the support service and implementation applications, and then planning and training have a 5-page maximum. And then you can see on the screen there's 8.5 by 11 page size, 12-point font, Times New Roman or Arial, and please do number your pages. It makes things a lot easier on the reviewers as they're meeting and discussing your application, or making notes to themselves and having to hop around within the application. So as I mentioned before, all applications must be submitted via grants.gov by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So please make sure you got the time zone. Those of you on the West Coast, that's a little bit earlier than midnight. And then, of course, if you're having any issues with the application process, please email us. You can email me or Matt. Our information is in the RFA if you're having any issues with the application process. The DUNS, SAM, and grants.gov all have helplines on their websites. There are also rules regarding naming conventions with the files in the application package, so you want to make sure that you follow those rules. And then, as somebody that used to write and submit grants, I always was up till 1 a.m. the night before it was due doing my last final touches. But if you can get your application in prior to the deadline, that's a really good idea, because everybody is going to be submitting their applications on the day they're due or the day before that, and grants.gov can run a little more slowly, and you just want to make sure that you allow yourself enough time for any mistakes to be corrected, high traffic area on your website, anything like that. So just give yourself some wiggle room there. Once you submit your application through grants.gov, grants.gov will send you several confirmations, and you want to make sure that you read all of the confirmations carefully and ensure that your application was actually accepted. Okay, let's talk about the budget and then your budget narrative for a moment. So of the required forms that I mentioned earlier, the SF424A is the budget form within the 424 family. So again, you'll find that in the application package, and there's also an individual copy in the form section on grants.gov. And the 424A form is where you will enter the totals for each budget category. This is a little snapshot of the SF424A, or a portion of it. What you see here is actually a combination of the first two pages of the form, which we combined so you can see them all on one screen. And it's just an example of a completed 424A, so you can see the fields that we need to have filled out, the kinds of things that we're looking for. When you do complete this, as Matt mentioned earlier, there is a match requirement for these grants. So on the top section of the screen, on the right-hand side, you can see new or revised budget, and there's federal and non-federal. Your match would be in the non-federal column, and then what you are requesting from us, from FNS, is the federal column. And then on the second page of the 424A, which is the bottom portion of the form on the screen in front of you, again, you can see a column for the federal request and then a column for the match. And the object class categories are the overall budget categories. And then those budget categories will be further broken down in your budget narrative, which we'll talk about briefly. As we review your application, one of the most common questions that reviewers have is along the lines of requesting further itemization of budget items. You want to be sure not to ask for a big chunk of money without really itemizing it and making it clear how you arrived at those numbers and what is included in that. So some examples are if you're requesting salaries, you want to say, you don't want to say I want requesting $55,000 for personnel. We want to know what the position is, the percentage of time or hours dedicated. Is $50,000 one person's full-time salary? Are you paying 10 people at a portion of a full-time equivalent? We want to know those details. For travel, this is another one that we often get lump sums for, and we really need you to itemize it. You want to say how many trips, how many travelers, how many people are going to be traveling, what is the cost of the trip, the purpose of the trip, how are you going to get there? Are you driving and charging mileage? Are you flying somewhere? Are you taking a hot air balloon? How are you going to get there? So again, please be sure to provide an explanation as to how the line item amounts were derived. We want calculations. Here's an example for the salary. So if you're requesting $5,000, this person makes $50 an hour. They're going to be devoting 10 hours a week to this grant over a period of 10 weeks. So please do that math for us, because if we have to figure it out ourselves, we may or may not be thinking along the same lines and come up with different numbers, and that will be a strike against you. There is a sample budget narrative on the Farm to School Grant website. Okay, indirect costs. You may request indirect costs, but you're not required to. And indirect costs are those costs that are benefiting more than just your proposed grant project, such as utility costs for your project location. You've got a payroll clerk and that is handling the salaries, but they're not funded directly by the grant, so indirect costs cover a portion of that. If you are going to claim indirect costs, you need to provide a negotiated indirect cost rate approval letter. And it can't be a letter that somebody in your organization just typed up for purposes of this grant saying this is what it is. We need some kind of documentation saying what the rate is, who's approved it, and all that. You may propose indirect costs within your budget proposal without an approved rate, but if your proposal is recommended for funding, in order to be able to claim those costs, we must have a copy of the indirect cost rate agreement. And honestly, if you have one already, you should include it with your application. And that is it for me, and now I'm going to turn it back over to Matt to talk a little bit about matching funds.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate it. So matching funds. Obviously, we've talked, referenced several times that this is a required 25% match, and as Anna said, in the RFA, as mentioned earlier, in the RFA, there is a sample calculation for matching funds. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So here's a sample, 25% match of all non-federal sources. It's important. So for the grant program, the matching funds must be non-federal sources. And here's a sample application. So if your grant request is 65% and your match amount is 25%, it's a total of $90,000 is your total project cost. And it's important to note that the match must be 25% of the total project cost. So you add those up and make sure the match is at least 25% of that. So examples of in-kind match: cash, salary paid to employees of a partner organization for related project activities. In-kind, very commonly used in our grant program, so a value of loaned or donated equipment based on fair market value or value of volunteer time. Hourly wages should be based on the current wage rate in the community. There's a lot more information on the website about the matching and the in-kind examples and cash examples, but it's important that I want to touch on here that both cash and in-kind are eligible for matching requirements. You are going to be required to document your matching funds. So, for example, timesheets of volunteer hours work, documentation of the value of loaned or donated equipment. And so that is standard federal grant accounting practices. There's more information in the request for application. There'll be a lot more information about that if you do receive an award about the appropriate way to document matching funds. If you have any questions, I'm seeing a few questions that come across on our chat function right now. They're very specific to examples of matching funds that that folks might be able to use in their application. We don't have time to go through the very specific examples, but our contact information is available. You can send those in, and we can take a look at those in a case-by-case basis. Looks like our slides are having a hard time advancing here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we've talked about the types of applications that are, or the types of grants that we support through the request for application. We've talked about the allowable activities. We've talked about the range in funding. We've talked about the application process in grants.gov and understanding that there's quite a bit that goes into getting registered into that system. We've talked about the matching fund. Now I'm going to talk a little bit in just a few minutes and we'll wrap up. We're going to go a few minutes over because we got a little bit of a late start there with the hiccup with the audio, but the farm to school resources that are available to you as an applicant. So first and foremost, we have a lot of information on the website, and you can sign up for our e-letter where you hear announcements about the webinars. A lot of folks probably heard about this webinar through the e-letter, so if you haven't signed up for it, I encourage you to check that out. Please email any questions to farmtoschool@fns.usda.gov. That questions will then be filtered over to me or to Anna or to whoever it is that we need to answer your question, and I encourage you to reach out. And reach out sooner rather than later so that we have time to get you the answer so that you have time to then submit your application. We have farm to school regional leads all across the country. In each regional office, you'll see here some initials like WRO, a Western Regional Office, MPRO, Mountain Plains Regional Office. Go online, you can see your regional contact. They're a great resource and are full of knowledge around networks and resources in your area. If you have questions about the grant program, you can also talk with them. And then we also have other USDA grant loan programs to consider. The Farm to School website, again, we have a website committed. The overarching office that the Farm to School program sits in is the Office of Community Food Systems. Within that, we have a Farm to School grant program webpage. There's all resources on there, including descriptions of past projects from the last 4 years. It has the frequently asked questions about the grant program, and it has the announcements. It has links to their RFA, so I strongly encourage you to go there. Here is the FY2017, a screenshot of the FY2017 grant program announcement. Here you'll see it. It's a list of all frequently asked questions, sample cover page, sample budget narrative, a lot of great information that will help you through the application process. You'll see on this page too that it says click here for more information on grants.gov. The actual request for application is hosted in grants.gov. That's just a federal processes that we are working with. And so you'll go into grants.gov, and you'll see here, it'll take you right to the Farm to School grant page. It'll give you a quick description on the synopsis tab, version history, not much information in there, but related documents. You'll go in there and click on this, and that's where you'll download the request for application. You'll also click on this package, this next tab over there. That's where you'll actually submit through grants.gov. There are a lot of resources on grants.gov that'll help you submit your project. So I encourage you, if you have any questions at all, call the help desk number, grants.gov. They are really good at answering the phone and walking you through the steps. If you have any issues with that, call us and we can help you. In the RFA, there are contact numbers for all the different programs that you need to submit an application, whether it's the SAM number or the DUNS number that Anna referenced earlier. There are contact and help desk numbers for all those. So don't wait till the end. The help is there, and someone will answer the phone and walk you through the process. Again, what we don't want is for you all as an applicant, farm to school practitioner, take your time to put together a beautiful application and then run into issues with these online systems. It happens every year, and we are always trying to come up with different ways to provide technical assistance to reduce that occurrence. And the number one thing that helps reduce that is applying early to the grant program. Again, some key dates. Today, we have the state agency webinar on October 4th. Tribal organization focus webinar on October 6th, and then the applications are due December 8th. We will announce the awards in mid-May. We have received a lot of questions over the last hour in the chat function, and many of them are very specific to a particular grant. And I encourage you, if you didn't hear back from us on the chat function today and you did ask a specific question, send it to our Farmer School email box, and we can take the time to go through your specific question about your specific situation in your community. We did have a few general questions that I'm going to take just a few minutes to explain, because I think they apply to the group, or several folks might find them relevant. So, what's the definition of a state agency? We have a lot of information about eligibility requirements in the RFA and the FAQ. The best thing to do in this particular situation, if you're wondering about the eligibility of, say, a state agency or a nonprofit or a school district, is to send us an email directly and say, this is the organization I'm asking about, are they eligible? We can look at the federal guidelines, we can help walk through that process and give you an answer on whether or not it's an eligible applicant. Same with school districts. There's a lot of different compositions of organizational compositions of schools and the types of programs they run. So if you have a specific question about the eligibility of your school district, email us directly. We'll take a look at your situation and we'll help you determine. We will determine together the eligibility of the grant. We had an interesting question about grant applications from schools and school districts, and the question was, can we receive an application from a school? And the applications typically come from the school district, but if the project is just for a subset of schools in that district, that's perfectly allowable. But as the school food authority, the school district is the one that submits the application. You can then narrow down to a subset of schools. Say you want to focus on pre-K through 4 in your school district, your rural or urban school district. Perfectly acceptable. The online applications will walk you through how to fill out the information so that it's clear for the reviewers. Can partnerships apply? So nonprofits and schools. What's important to note in the federal grant application process is that it's about who's eligible for the application. So if the school district wants to apply for the programs that can be funded to school districts, in this case planning and implementation grants, you can absolutely partner with other organizations on your project. And a couple other general questions. There was a question about the distribution of funding, the 19% award rate. The question was, do we distribute on average 19% of that $5 million? And the answer to that is no. We distribute $5 million every year, but approximately 19% of our applications get selected for funding, totaling about roughly $5 million. Again, we have a lot of very specific questions. We're not going to get to them all. I encourage you to send those unique questions to our Farm to School website, and we'll answer them and work through those case-by-case scenario. And with that, I just want to thank everybody. We had great participation today, almost 700 folks dialed in, 600 and some folks. A lot of interest in the grant program, and just want to close by thanking Anna for joining us and really encouraging everybody to consider this the beginning of a conversation about the application process. If you have questions about it, please reach out to us. It's what we're here for, to help you get the support for the programs, the great programs that you're doing across the country. With that, I want to say thank you, and we will send out an email after this call that will include the slides, and we will let you know when the audio recording is available for future use. So thank you, everybody, and have a good day.